B2A Solutions is your trusted IT consulting company located in the heart of Europe. We design, build, and maintain scalable and user-friendly solutions tailored to your needs. Want to join a team that is shaping the future of the JavaScript ecosystem in Belgium? A team involved in the community by organizing events and contributing to open source? Join B2A Solutions now.
Just like me, he works for ING, front-end developer, and he is in the front line of the type of information that our people are looking at right now, but I'm not going to say too much. I'm going to let him do the talking, so let's put it up, ladies and gentlemen, for Stijn Van Asschodt.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Stijn, and I'm going to be honest, I'm pretty nervous to stand here before you because I was going to use the same excuse as Simon, that this is my first ever talk, but now that he nailed his talk, I cannot use that anymore. So, but yeah, my name's Stijn. If you wonder how to pronounce it when you see this, just think of this guy. That's me. Just say, hi, Stijn. And in my spare time, I'm an amateur triathlete. I swim, I cycle, and I run. And this is a picture of me. I'm somewhere in there last Sunday in the washing machine, as they call it, which was pretty hectic. And I'm also a BJS community member. So from the very beginning, when we were still meeting in person before the pandemic hit, this is me at one of the first meetups. And as mentioned, I'm professionally an engineer at ING, where I focus on front-end development. And it's also where I got an appetite for accessibility, also thanks to the Accessibility Champion program that we have at ING. Now, this abbreviation might ring a bell. So this is accessibility, and why is that? Well, it's just counting all the letters in between the first one and the last one of the word accessibility, and then putting it in between. That's it. But what is accessibility concretely? Well, accessibility is the removal of barriers that slow down or stop people with disabilities from using our products and services. And examples of removing such barriers can be in real life, as the knobs you see on the sidewalks that indicate a crosswalk for people with a visual impairment, or even elevator access where there would only be stairs normally on platforms for the train. But it's also applicable for web accessibility. And unfortunately, that is often something that we'll do later. It remains a feature, something that we see as a feature that we'll do later when we have some time. It's a nice to have rather than it being part of the acceptance criteria of our minimal viable product. And that's a problem, because then that means that those barriers remain for part of our user base. And it's not necessarily a small part of our user base, because a published document from the World Health Organization in 2011, the World Report on Disability, they said that over a billion people were estimated to be living with a disability. Now, of course, not every disability is the same, and not every person with a disability uses the web in the same way. And that's what this visual is also trying to visualize. So it's a persona spectrum that has listed several kinds of disabilities: touch, hear, see, and speak. It's not the exclusive list. There's others as well. You have cognitive disabilities and many others. But just to keep things brief here, what it's visualizing is that there are permanent disabilities, but by creating solutions for people with a permanent disability, you are also solving or providing a solution for people with a temporary or a situational disability. And an example of that is if we take color blindness, for example. We know that we need sufficient color contrast between our different colors in order for people to be able to distinguish between our elements on the page. But that also goes for people who are using a mobile phone and browsing it under direct sunlight. You also could use better color contrast to see all the elements. And the same goes for adding captions on your videos for all the sound. if it helps for people with hearing loss to be able to know what the video is about, but also people who are at a busy train station who cannot hear all the audio on the screen or on their device, and similarly for if you are in a very silent environment where you cannot play sound, like a library. Well, the people with disabilities, they interact with the web using assistive technologies. And examples of that would be using the keyboard only. So if you have a limited motor functionality and you cannot operate a mouse, or if you have limited vision and you cannot see the cursor on your monitor, or even if you have a mouse stick or a headband and you operate a specialized keyboard, then you're using only the keyboard to interact with the page. There's also software solutions that you can use to modify the content on the page, which would be, for example, changing the colors for people with color blindness, zooming in, enlarging only the text, or removing distracting images. There's also this cool device, the refreshable Braille display. So what it does, it will read out the text on your screen, and it will translate it into Braille. And you can't really see it properly, but at the bottom here, that's the Braille. So there are little white knobs that pop up to form the Braille letters, and they refresh over time if you continue. And a bit similar, but then a software solution is the screen reader. So it will read out the text on your page and convert it into speech. And you can read through all the content, or like this example here, it will also give you some shortcuts that you can use to skip to content more efficiently. This one lists all the landmarks on my page. Like on the left side, I have the main navigation. On the middle, I have the main. And on the right side, I have some other landmarks. Well, I can skip to those, and then I immediately in the content that I want to be in. And let's see if this works. So there's also the web Accessibility Initiative by W3C. They have an interesting website with a lot of information, and what I find particularly useful here is perspective videos. So what this does is it really shows you videos of people with disabilities and how they interact with the web. And that really helps us to get an understanding of how people are using our applications on a day-to-day basis. And we can use all that knowledge in order to make our products bulletproof. And the way we can do that then, we can use our knowledge. And now that we know how people are using it, we know what frustrations that they might run into. As far as development goes, there are a lot of different scenarios, and I will not cover everything that you can do in order to develop accessible products. But what I would recommend is a website called Teach Access. They have some interactive tutorials on how to make your HTML elements accessible and how to recognize inaccessible elements. Example here, so there are a list of different elements that you can see, and then they have like an interactive exercise. This is an unsemantic heading, so it's just a div that is styled to look like a heading. And the difference with this one, this is an H3, which is a level 3 heading, as most of you will know. What this one is you can use your screen reader to, well, it says it right there, you can use some shortcuts here, Control, Option, Command, H, to jump to headings. So semantic headings really allow me, as a screen reader user then, to skip to the headings. And if your heading is really, if it makes sense, if it's related to the content that you're displaying, then I know, this is the content that I want to read about. So now I know I'm at the right place, and I can go to the content that's underneath this heading. Another nice one is, again, W3C, and let me increase this size a bit. So they have some tips for developing for accessibility, and what this will help you to do is it helps you meet the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG. That's a rule of requirements to have an accessible website, basically. And let's take another example here. It's associating a label with every form control. So here I have an input field with the label username, and how I define that correctly is I have an input field with an ID of username, and I reuse that ID in my label element. It has a for attribute where I specify it. And the nice thing here then is that if I'm in a form and I'm going through all the interactable elements with my screen reader, that if I have my input element focused like this, it will read out username input, so that I know that this input is expecting me to put in a username. I had all this just in case something went wrong. And now that we know how to develop, we would like to test our accessible website. And luckily for us, as developers, we like things automated, and there are several tools that you can use to automate your accessibility testing. And for this, I'm again using an example. So W3C has a website that they made. It's the before and after demonstration, or BAD. And they have an inaccessible version, which I have open right here, and they have an accessible version that you can use. So they have this one with loads of issues, and then they have a version that has everything solved. And the tool I want to talk about first is a browser plugin called the Axe DevTools. You can install it for Chrome, and what you can do is scan your entire page, and it will then list all the accessibility issues or violations that you have. It will order them through critical, serious, moderate, minor. And here, if we take an example, sufficient color contrast, so I can highlight it on the page. It's right here. I can inspect it also in the DOM. And if I go back now, I can get some more information, which opens the next tab and explains to me how to fix the problem, why it is an issue here, and yeah, what the acceptance criteria are and how to meet them. And that's also explained down below here. If I can enlarge it, but to solve the issue, you need to, so we have a color contrast of 3.88, which is the difference between the background color and the foreground color, so our text versus the background, and it needs to be at least 4.5, which is right here. It needs to be at least 4.5 to 1 to meet the minimal requirement. Another nice DevTools is in Firefox. So Firefox has the accessibility DevTools built right in, and if I check it out, it will give me an accessibility tree of all the elements. I can check here, so I can filter on several issues. If we take, again, contrast ratio as an example, we see, again, the same issue listed here, 3.88, so that's an issue. I can also simulate certain types of color blindness, so if you see the red color changed because this is a type of color blindness that sees no red. And another nice one is I can trigger this to show the tabbing order on my page. So that's particularly useful to know which interaction element will be active next if I tab through the page. And I can see if this order is a bit logical, as you would expect. For us, here in Europe, in Belgium, it would be left to right and top to bottom. Another nice one built in, but then in Chrome, is Lighthouse. And Lighthouse, I should have clicked this before because it can take a while, but what it does, it will audit your page. You can choose different metrics, and I'm now choosing to get an audit solely on accessibility. There's other things you can do on performance and others. It will give you percentage-based score. I'm scoring 59 now out of 100, which is not that great. And again, it will list all the issues. Again, contrast ratio. It will give you the one that is failing with a screenshot. Screenshot isn't making sense right now because it's not correct, but normally it would work. And then again, if you continue, there are some additional checks that you can do manually as well. There's also, well, we use web components at ING, so we use open web components a lot, open source, with some extra tooling. And what they have is they built in an accessibility suite that we can just use like this. We expect our element to be accessible. Now, if I add my tests to a commit hook, then every time I'm committing, it's testing and it's checking that my element is accessible. And you also have, for testing library, you also have accessibility checks that you can use. And similarly, there's ESLint, an ESLint plugin. So both the ESLint plugin and the testing tool, they are based on the Xcore API, which is actually also developed by X DevTools. So it's the same it's the same engine that's running under the hood of the X DevTools. So you just install the plugin. It's based on JSX, so there's also one for JSX on GitHub. And what you would get is, let me skip through all this. And what you would get is, if you run the linting, is an error, and it says on this line you are using an image without an alternate text attribute. And if you have a VS Code plugin like I do, it will tell you immediately while you're developing that there is an issue. But unfortunately, automated tests don't cover everything. Not every defect is covered. And we got to catch them all. And how do we do that? That's with manual testing, just like Lighthouse was actually recommending us to do. One way to do that, or the best way actually to do it, is to test in the same way that your users are using your products. As we said, users are using, for example, the keyboard alone to test our feature. And we can do that then by tabbing through our application. We can tab through all the interactional elements and see that the logical order is followed. Like I mentioned, left to right, top to bottom, at least for my use case now. And then you can interact with those elements using only your keyboard, spacebar, enter, whatever you want to do, and check that it works as expected. And the other important one is a screen reader. I mentioned it before, so it will read out the text that's on your page, and if I'm on an interactionable element like a button, it will tell me the button and the label, and then you're on a button, and then where you are exactly, how you can move away, etc. Or like this, if you want to skip to content more easily, and this is something that you will then notice if you use a screen reader, that if I'm going through all the links, I see 6 times read more, which is something you often see. Click here, read more. But that doesn't tell me anything. I don't know what I will be reading more about, right? So make sure that links have an appropriate label attached to them. And screen readers nowadays are built into our OSs. So we have the narrator on Windows, we have VoiceOver on Mac OS and iOS, and we have TalkBack on Android. So really easy to use. You don't need to install anything extra. It does, however, require some getting used to. I can say that, to be honest. It takes a bit of time. Now, I know you're all convinced that accessibility is important, but how do I convince this guy? How do I convince my manager, my product owner, etc., that we need to allocate time to this, for the future or for products that we've already developed and that we want to make accessible? Well, again, there's W3C to the rescue. They have created a business case for digital accessibility. And they have different categories, or they have different pillars that are important for this, and they add, let me see, they add some case studies, which might be important for convincing people to show, like, hey, these guys did it before, and it really worked. And so they divide it, or they say, this businesses that integrate accessibility are more likely to be innovative, inclusive enterprises that reach more people with positive brand messaging that meets emerging global legal requirements. Now, that's a whole mouthful, but let's break it down. So, driving innovation, well, by designing for or developing also for people with a disability, you are creating innovative products. An example of that would be, as we saw just now in the case study, I went over it pretty quickly, but that's how Apple actually came up with the VoiceOver for iOS. Increasing market share, well, as we saw in the persona spectrum at the very beginning, is that by providing these solutions for people with permanent disability, we are also fixing problems for people with temporary and situational disabilities, so we are actually scaling to a larger audience. And by scaling to a larger audience, we are also increasing our market share. There's more people using our products, and if users are satisfied with it, they will return more often, they will use the product, and they will perhaps even share their positive experiences with other people. And that has a positive impact on your brand as well, because inaccessible products, they will have negative impact on your brand, of course, but that makes sense because it may not be intentional, or at least I hope not, but if you have an inaccessible product, that would mean that some part of your user base is not able to use your product, or just part of it. And that has a negative impact because, as we just saw in the market share, there's they will share their knowledge or share their experience with the product, and if it's a negative experience, they will probably share it even quicker. And on the other hand, having a thinking about accessibility proactively will then have a positive impact on your brand. And then there's the legal risk. So nowadays, more and more countries are making more legal requirements for accessibility. An example of that is the European Accessibility Act, which aims to kind of remove the barriers that are created by rules from the different member states and have a better experience for all. How do we tackle accessibility at ING? Well, one thing that we do, we have a long way to go still, or a way to go to become fully accessible. I'm going to be honest there, but we do have some goals set up and some requirements listed that we want to meet over time, and that will help us to become accessible and to meet the European Accessibility Act requirements as well, because as a bank, we will need to follow that. One thing we do on the front-end side is we make use of Lion web components, an open source library for web components, and it's unstyled, it's lightweight, and most importantly here, it is accessible out of the box. So I've heard this before today, some components accessible out of the box, that's really good. And Lion has a component library that we use, and then it's completely unstyled. So if we want, then as a bank, we want to fit this component into our branding, so we style it the way we want to, and of course we keep color contrast ratio in mind when we do that. And by making sure that our building blocks are already accessible out of the box, we can make sure that our feature teams just need to focus on making the feature end-to-end accessible. That's like focusing on the tabbing order through it and making sure your labels make sense, etc. We also have an accessibility champion program. So as I mentioned, I am following that as well. So it's an idea, or it aims to share knowledge across the bank for accessibility. It's not just limited to developers. We also want to have designers and business analysts to have an idea at least of what is accessibility and why it is important. And as I mentioned, we are setting requirements, or at least a step-by-step approach that we want to take in order to become accessible, or to have accessibility as a minimal requirement later on, and to build it into our way of working. And a bit last minute maybe, but there is the Global Accessibility Awareness Day coming up next week on Thursday, the 19th of May. So abbreviation is GOD. It's a day that aims to get everyone talking, learning, and just learning more about accessibility as a whole, about digital access and inclusion. So maybe it's the ideal day for all of you to learn a bit more about the topics that I just discussed, maybe play around with some of the tools that I showed, and maybe to test a bit with the screen reader, because by testing with assistive technology, we are able to get a better understanding of how users are using our products. And with that understanding, we can use that knowledge to develop with accessibility in mind from the start. And by doing that, we will provide a better user experience for everyone. Because accessibility is essential for some, but useful for all. Thank you.
B2A Solutions is your trusted IT consulting company located in the heart of Europe. We design, build, and maintain scalable and user-friendly solutions tailored to your needs. Want to join a team that is shaping the future of the JavaScript ecosystem in Belgium? A team involved in the community by organizing events and contributing to open source? Join B2A Solutions now.